Jake Morrison had been the best horse trainer in 3 counties before that terrible day changed everything. The 20RT rolled. Cowboy lived for the thrill of breaking wild Mustangs and the freedom of riding across endless Texas plains. His weathered hands could calm the most stubborn horse, and his confident smile could charm anyone who met him. The Morrison Ranch had been in his family for 4 generations, and Jake planned to pass it down to his own children someday. That morning started like any other. Jake woke before dawn, pulled on his worn leather boots, and headed to the stables. The autumn air was crisp, and the horses nickered softly as he approached with their morning feed. Thunder, his favorite black stallion, pawed the ground eagerly. Jake had been working with Thunder for months, preparing him for the upcoming rodeo season. The horse was spirited but showed promise of becoming something special. After feeding the horses, Jake decided to take Thunder out for a training ride. The stallion had been cooped up in the stable for 2 days due to bad weather, and Jake could see the animal was restless. Against his better judgment, he saddled Thunder despite the horse's agitated state. Maybe it was overconfidence, or maybe it was just bad luck. But Jake climbed onto Thunder's back without his usual careful preparation. Thunder bolted immediately, catching Jake off guard. The horse reared high on his hind legs, then bucked violently. Jake, normally able to handle any horse's tantrum, lost his grip on the reins. In slow motion, he felt himself falling backward. His body hit the fence post with a sickening crack that echoed across the ranch. Pain shot through his spine like lightning, and then everything went numb below his waist. Jake's father found him 20 minutes later, unconscious and twisted at an unnatural angle. The ambulance ride to Houston Methodist Hospital was a blur of sirens and worried voices. When Jake finally woke up 3 days later, the doctor's words shattered his world more completely than the accident had shattered his spine. The damage was permanent. He would never walk again, never ride again, never be the man he once was. The next few weeks passed in a haze of medical procedures and physical therapy sessions that felt pointless. Jake stared at the hospital ceiling, counting tiles and wondering what purpose his life could possibly have now. Visitors came and went, offering sympathy and false hope, but Jake barely acknowledged them. His mother cried every time she visited. His father tried to discuss the future of the ranch, but Jake turned away. What was the point of planning for a future he didn't want? The hardest moment came when they brought him his first wheelchair. The metal and vinyl contraption sat beside his bed like a mechanical vulture, waiting to become his permanent companion. Jake refused to even look at it for 2 days. When he finally allowed the physical therapist to help him transfer from the bed to the chair, the reality hit him like a punch to the gut. This was his new normal. This cold, sterile chair would be his legs for the rest of his life. Depression settled over Jake like a heavy blanket. He pushed away everyone who tried to help. When his girlfriend Sarah tried to stay and support him, he told her to leave and find someone who could give her the life she deserved. When his best friend Mike visited with updates about the horses, Jake asked him not to come back. The ranch that had once been his pride and joy now felt like a museum of everything he had lost. After 6 weeks in the hospital, Jake returned to the ranch in an ambulance. His father had installed ramps and modified the house, but every change reminded Jake of what he could no longer do. The horses in the pasture seemed to mock him from a distance. Thunder, the horse that had destroyed his life, had been sold immediately after the accident. Jake was glad he never had to see the animal again, but the absence felt like another loss. Days blended into weeks as Jake sat in his room, staring out the window at the land that no longer belonged to him in any meaningful way. His mother brought him meals that he barely touched. His father tried to discuss ranch business, but Jake had no interest in hearing about activities he could no longer participate in. The physical therapy equipment they had set up in the spare room gathered dust. Jake saw no point in getting stronger for a life he didn't want to live. The worst part was the pity in everyone's eyes. Neighbors who had once respected him as an equal now spoke to him in soft, careful voices, as if he were made of glass. Former competitors from the rodeo circuit visited awkwardly, not knowing what to say to a cowboy who could no longer ride. Jake began to refuse all visitors, instructing his parents to tell everyone he was sleeping or not feeling well at night. Jake lay awake, planning his escape from this nightmare. He researched methods online when no one was watching. He wrote letters he never intended to send, explaining to his family why he couldn't continue living this half-life. The ranch felt like a prison, and the wheelchair felt like chains. Every morning brought the same crushing realization that this was real, permanent, and inescapable. His parents grew increasingly worried as Jake withdrew further into himself. They suggested counseling, support groups, even a change of scenery. But Jake rejected every offer of help. He had made up his mind that some injuries were too devastating to heal from. Some dreams, once broken, could never be repaired. He was just waiting for the right moment to end his suffering permanently. Family doctor warned that Jake was showing signs of severe depression and might harm himself. His mother started checking on him every few hours, and his father removed anything that could be used as a weapon. But they couldn't watch him every moment of every day. Jake knew it was only a matter of time before he found his opportunity to escape the prison his life had become. Emma Rodriguez arrived at the Morrison Ranch on a gray Tuesday morning in November, 6 months after Jake's accident. She drove a dusty red pickup truck and carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from years of hard work and self-reliance. At 26, she had already built a reputation as one of the most skilled physical therapists specializing in spinal injuries in all of Texas. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her worn jeans and boots showed she was no stranger to ranch life. Emma had grown up on a horse ranch in New Mexico before losing her father in a riding accident when she was 15. The tragedy had driven her to pursue physical therapy, hoping to help others recover from the kinds of injuries that had taken her father's mobility before ultimately claiming his life. She understood the unique challenges that cowboys faced when their bodies betrayed the lifestyle they lived for. This understanding, combined with her no-nonsense approach to therapy, had made her the most requested therapist for injured rodeo riders and ranchers across the Southwest. Jake's mother, Margaret Morrison, had spent weeks researching therapists. Before finding Emma's contact information through a friend whose son had worked with her after a bull riding accident, Margaret had called Emma personally, explaining Jake's condition and his refusal to participate in any form of treatment. Most therapists had politely declined to take on such a difficult case. But something in Margaret's desperate voice had convinced Emma to make the 2-hour drive to the Morrison Ranch. When Emma knocked on the front door, she was greeted by Jake's father, Robert Morrison. His weathered face showed the strain of watching his son give up on life. Robert explained that Jake had been refusing all visitors for weeks and would probably not even acknowledge Emma's presence. He warned her that Jake had become hostile and might say cruel things to drive her away. Emma listened patiently, then asked to be shown to Jake's room. Jake was sitting in his wheelchair by the window when Emma entered without knocking. He didn't turn around, assuming it was another family member coming to check on him. Emma stood silently for a moment, observing the man who had once been known throughout Texas for his skill with horses. Even seated and obviously defeated, she could see the strength in his shoulders and the proud set of his jaw. His brown hair had grown longer than he usually kept it, and his beard was unkempt. But Emma could see past the depression to the man underneath. When Jake finally realized someone new was in his room, he turned his wheelchair around slowly. His first sight of Emma caught him off guard. She wasn't what he had expected from a physical therapist. She looked more like she belonged on horseback than in a medical facility. Her steady brown eyes met his without flinching, showing neither pity nor false cheerfulness. For the first time in months, Jake felt like someone was looking at him as a person rather than a patient. Emma introduced herself simply, explaining that she had been asked to evaluate his condition. Jake immediately launched into the speech. He had prepared for unwanted visitors, telling her that he wasn't interested in therapy and that she was wasting her time. He expected her to argue with him or try to convince him otherwise, but Emma just nodded and said she understood. Then she surprised him by asking if she could look around the ranch instead of working with him. Confused but curious despite himself, Jake found himself agreeing to show Emma around the property. It was the first time he had left his room voluntarily. In weeks, as they moved around the ranch, Emma asked questions about the horses, the land, and the operation. Jake found himself answering despite his intention to remain silent. Emma's knowledge of ranching impressed him, and her genuine interest in his family's history began to crack the wall he had built around himself. When they reached the horse pasture, Emma's demeanor changed. She stood at the fence, watching the horses with the kind of focused attention that Jake recognized in fellow horse lovers. She pointed out details about each animal's conformation and behavior that showed she had real experience with horses. Jake found himself drawn into a conversation about bloodlines and training methods. Forgetting for a moment that he was supposed to be pushing her away, Emma mentioned that she had grown up training horses with her father before his accident. She spoke matter-of-factly about losing him, not seeking sympathy, but sharing her story as a way of connecting with Jake's experience. When Jake asked what had happened to her father, Emma explained that he had suffered a spinal injury similar. Jake's butt had lived for 3 more years before dying from complications. She spoke about those 3 years not as a tragedy, but as a gift of additional time they had been given together. As the afternoon wore on, Jake realized that Emma wasn't trying to fix him or convince him to embrace his new reality. Instead, she was simply treating him like a person whose opinions and knowledge mattered. When she mentioned needing to head back to town before dark, Jake surprised himself by asking when she might return. Emma said she could come back later in the week if he wanted to continue their conversation about horses. That evening, Jake found himself thinking about Emma's visit instead of dwelling on his usual dark thoughts. She had stirred something in him that had been dormant since the accident, a flicker of interest in something outside his own misery. Her story about her father intrigued him, not because it was tragic, but because she had found a way to honor his memory through her work helping others. When Emma returned 3 days later, Jake was waiting by the window, having spent the morning wondering if she would actually come back. This time, he wheeled himself to the door to greet her instead of making her come find him. Emma smiled when she saw him, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. She had brought coffee and homemade cookies, explaining that she had stopped by a bakery in town that reminded her of one from her childhood. They spent the afternoon talking about everything except Jake's injury. Emma told stories about growing up in New Mexico, her struggles in college, and the satisfaction she found in helping people regain their strength and independence. Jake found himself sharing memories of his own childhood on the ranch, his dreams for expanding the operation, and even some of his fears about the future. For the first time since the accident, Jake felt like himself again, not just a broken version of who he used to be. Emma began visiting the Morrison Ranch 3 times a week, and slowly, Jake started looking forward to her arrivals. She never pushed him toward formal physical therapy sessions, but she had a way of incorporating small exercises into their daily activities. When they toured the ranch, she would suggest they take longer routes that required more upper body strength to navigate. When they sat talking, she would casually mention stretches that might help with the back pain Jake had been hiding from his family. The breakthrough came during Emma's 4th week of visits. Jake had been complaining about his inability to properly care for the horses from his wheelchair. Stable doors were too heavy, the feed bins too high, and the water troughs impossible to clean effectively. Emma listened to his frustrations without offering the usual empty reassurances. Instead, she asked detailed questions about each task, taking notes on her phone as if she were conducting a business consultation. The following week, Emma arrived with her truck loaded with equipment. She had spent her own money on adaptive tools and modifications that would allow Jake to resume some of his horse care duties. There were lightweight scoops with extended handles, a portable platform that could raise his wheelchair to different heights, and a harness system that would give him more stability when leaning out of his chair. Jake was overwhelmed by her thoughtfulness and the obvious time and money she had invested in helping him. Together, he spent the morning modifying the stable area and testing the new equipment. Jake struggled at first, his muscles weak from months of inactivity, but Emma patiently coached him through each movement. When he successfully filled a water trough for the first time since his accident, tears ran down his face. Emma pretended not to notice, busying herself with organizing tools while Jake composed himself that afternoon. Jake asked Emma to teach him proper exercises to rebuild his strength. It was the first time he had voluntarily requested physical therapy since leaving the hospital. Emma agreed but insisted they start slowly. She designed a program that focused on practical movements he would need for ranch work rather than abstract exercises that felt pointless. Every stretch and strengthening routine had a direct connection to a task Jake wanted to accomplish. As Jake's physical condition improved, so did his mental state. Emma's visits became the highlight of his week, and he found himself planning topics to discuss with her and small improvements to show off when she arrived. His parents noticed the change immediately. Jake started joining them for meals instead of eating alone in his room. He began taking an interest in ranch operations again, asking his father for updates and offering suggestions for improvements. Emma, meanwhile, found herself looking forward to her visits to the Morrison Ranch more than her other appointments. Jake's dry sense of humor and extensive knowledge of horses made their conversations engaging and enjoyable. She admired his determination once he decided to fight back against his limitations. There was something attractive about watching a strong man work to rebuild himself without self-pity or excuses. Their relationship shifted subtly during the 6th week when a thunderstorm trapped Emma at the ranch overnight. The roads became impassable due to flooding, and the Morrison family insisted she stay in their guest room. Jake and Emma sat on the covered porch, watching the rain and lightning while sharing stories about their childhoods. The intimate setting and Emma's guard being down led to deeper conversations about their fears, dreams, and disappointments. Emma confessed that she had never married because she had trouble trusting men after watching her mother struggle to care for her disabled father. She'd seen too many relationships crumble under the pressure of injury and disability. Jake admitted that he had been planning to propose to his former girlfriend Sarah before the accident, but had pushed her away because he believed he had nothing to offer a woman anymore. Their honesty created a new level of understanding between them. The next morning, Jake woke early and made his way to the kitchen to start coffee before Emma got up. It was a small gesture, but it represented a significant change in his thinking. For the first time since his accident, he was considering someone else's comfort and happiness instead of focusing solely on his own misery. When Emma came downstairs and found him preparing breakfast, her smile lit up the entire kitchen. After the overnight visit, Emma's relationship with Jake became more personal. She started arriving earlier and staying later during her scheduled visits. Their conversations ranged beyond horses and therapy to include books, movies, politics, and dreams for the future. Jake found himself thinking about Emma constantly between her visits, analyzing their conversations and planning ways to make her laugh during her next trip to the ranch. Emma, for her part, was fighting her own internal battle. Her professional ethics told her to maintain boundaries with clients, but Jake had become much more than a patient to her. She found herself dressing more carefully for their meetings and looking forward to their time together with an anticipation that went beyond professional satisfaction. She had never met a man who combined physical strength with emotional vulnerability the way Jake did. The turning point came when Emma arrived at the ranch to find Jake working in the stable, successfully managing the horses using the adaptive equipment she had helped him install. He was dirty, sweaty, and completely absorbed in his work. The sight of him functioning as a capable rancher again, rather than as a disabled patient, stirred feelings in Emma that she had been trying to suppress. Jake looked up from mucking a stall to see Emma watching him with an expression he had never seen before. There was admiration in her eyes, but also something deeper and more personal. For a moment they stared at each other in silence, both recognizing that their relationship had crossed into uncharted territory. The air between them felt charged with possibility and uncertainty that afternoon. Their usual easy conversation felt stilted and awkward. Both of them were aware of the shift in their dynamic, but unsure how to address it. Usual, claiming she had paperwork to catch up on. Jake watched her drive away, feeling a mixture of hope and fear about what might be developing between them. He spent the rest of the evening wondering if Emma could ever see him as more than just another patient to heal. The week following their awkward goodbye stretched endlessly for both Jake and Emma. Jake found himself constantly checking his phone for messages and looking out the window for her familiar red truck. Emma, struggling with her growing feelings, threw herself into work with her other clients but found it impossible to concentrate. Every conversation felt shallow compared to the depth she had discovered with Jake. When Emma finally returned to the ranch, she brought a formal therapy evaluation form. She announced that she needed to assess Jake's progress to determine if he still required her services. The clinical distance she was trying to establish felt forced and uncomfortable for both of them. Jake responded by treating their session like a medical appointment, demonstrating his improved strength and mobility with mechanical precision. Halfway through the evaluation, Emma stopped writing notes and set down her clipboard. She told Jake honestly that he had progressed far beyond what most patients achieved, and that he no longer needed regular therapy sessions. The news should have been cause for celebration, but instead, both of them felt devastated. They sat in silence, understanding that Emma's professional obligations were ending their reason to see each other. Jake finally broke the silence by asking if Emma would like to stay for dinner as a friend rather than as his therapist. Emma hesitated, knowing that accepting would cross a professional line she had never crossed before. But the thought of not seeing Jake again felt unbearable. She agreed, with the condition that this would be their last official session. Over dinner with Jake's parents, conversation flowed naturally despite the underlying tension between Jake and Emma. Margaret Morrison had grown fond of Emma during her months of visits and commented on how much Jake had improved under her care. Robert Morrison praised Emma's innovative approach and suggested she should write a book about working with injured ranchers. The warmth of the family dinner made Emma realize how much she would miss being part of this world. After dinner, Jake asked Emma to take one final walk around the ranch with him. As they moved through the familiar paths, Jake pointed out improvements he had made possible because of her encouragement and equipment modifications. He showed her plans he had drawn for expanding the accessible areas of the ranch and discussed his ideas for breeding a new line of horses specifically suited for therapeutic riding programs. Emma was amazed by Jake's transformation from a man who had given up on life to someone making plans for an ambitious future. She told him how proud she was of his recovery and how much she had learned from working with him. Jake thanked her not just for the physical therapy, but for seeing potential in him when he couldn't see it himself. He credited her with saving his life in ways that went far beyond medical treatment. As they reached Jake's favorite spot overlooking the pasture, he stopped his wheelchair and turned to face Emma directly. He told her that he had fallen in love with her somewhere between her first visit and now. He acknowledged that he understood if she couldn't return his feelings, given their professional relationship and his disability, but he wanted her to know that she had given him something to live for beyond just physical recovery. Emma's carefully maintained professional composure finally cracked. She admitted that she had been fighting her own feelings for weeks. She had fallen in love with his strength, his humor, and his determination to rebuild his life. But she was terrified of the complications their relationship would face. She had seen too many couples destroyed by the challenges of disability. She couldn't bear the thought of that happening to them. Jake listened to her fears without arguing or trying to convince her otherwise. He simply told her that he understood her concerns and that he would respect whatever decision she made. But he also said that he believed their connection was worth fighting for, even if that fight would be difficult. He asked her to think about whether she was protecting them both from potential heartbreak or preventing them from experiencing something beautiful. That night, Emma lay awake in her apartment, replaying every conversation she had shared with Jake over the past months. She realized that what she felt for him was deeper and more genuine than anything she had experienced in previous relationships. Jake's disability wasn't something she had to overlook or work around. It was simply part of who he was, and she loved all of him. The next morning, Emma made a decision that surprised even herself. She called Jake and asked if she could come back to the ranch, not as his therapist, but as someone who wanted to explore what they might have together. Jake's voice when he said yes was filled with hope and joy that made Emma's heart race. When Emma arrived at the ranch that afternoon, Jake was waiting by the front gate with a picnic basket. He had asked his mother to help him prepare lunch and had planned a horseback ride to their favorite overlook. Emma was puzzled until she saw the gentle mare saddled and waiting, equipped with specialized mounting equipment that would allow Jake to ride again. Jake explained that he had been secretly working on regaining his ability to ride using adaptive equipment and techniques he had researched online. It had taken weeks of practice and several minor falls, but he had finally mastered the skills needed to mount and control a horse from his wheelchair. He wanted to share this achievement with Emma as the person who had made his recovery possible. Watching Jake successfully mount the horse and ride with confidence was an emotional moment for Emma. She realized that this man had not let his limitations define him, but had instead found ways to transcend them. His determination and creativity in adapting to his new reality inspired her and convinced her that together they could handle whatever challenges their relationship might face. During their picnic, Jake and Emma talked honestly about their fears and expectations for a romantic relationship. They discussed the practical challenges they would face and the judgments they might encounter from others. But they also talked about their dreams, their compatibility, and the deep connection they had discovered. By the end of the afternoon, they had decided to give their relationship a real chance. Their first kiss happened as the sun set over the Texas hills, with Jake's horse grazing peacefully nearby. It was awkward at first, with Emma having to lean down to Jake's level and both of them being nervous. But the tenderness and love they shared made up for any physical clumsiness. In that moment, they both knew they had found something special worth fighting for. The first few months of Jake and Emma's romantic relationship brought both joy and unexpected challenges. Emma faced criticism from colleagues who questioned her ethics in dating a former patient. Some suggested she had taken advantage of Jake's vulnerability during his recovery. The gossip hurt Emma deeply, but Jake's unwavering support and confidence in their relationship helped her weather the professional storm. Jake, meanwhile, dealt with his own insecurities about whether he could truly be a complete partner to Emma. Despite his physical improvements, he still struggled with tasks that had once been effortless. There were days when his frustration with his limitations made him withdraw emotionally, fearing that Emma deserved someone who could give her a traditional relationship without complications. Their first major test came when Emma's truck broke down during a winter storm while she was driving to the ranch for dinner. Jake immediately wanted to rescue her, but faced the harsh reality that he couldn't simply jump in his truck, drive to her aid like he would have before the accident. Instead, he had to call his father for help while feeling helpless and inadequate as Emma's boyfriend, Robert. Morrison found Emma stranded on the side of the road and brought her safely to the ranch. But Jake's mood was dark throughout the evening. After dinner, he exploded in frustration, telling Emma that she deserved a man who could protect her and take care of her properly. Emma let him vent his anger and self-doubt, then calmly reminded him of all the ways he had already taken care of her emotionally and intellectually over the past months. Emma pointed out that Jake's support had helped her through her own professional crisis when colleagues questioned her ethics. His encouragement had given her the confidence to defend their relationship and maintain her integrity. She told him that protection and care came in many forms, and that his emotional strength and wisdom were more valuable to her than physical rescue capabilities. That conversation marked a turning point in their relationship. Jake began to understand that Emma loved him for who he was, not for what he could or couldn't do physically. Emma, in turn, learned to be patient with Jake's occasional moments of self-doubt while standing firm in her commitment to their partnership. Spring brought new opportunities for both of them. Jake's therapeutic riding program idea had gained attention from medical professionals in the area. Several doctors began referring patients to the Morrison Ranch for equine-assisted therapy sessions. Emma helped Jake develop proper protocols and safety procedures, combining her medical expertise with his horse knowledge to create a unique program. The success of their therapeutic riding program led to media attention and recognition from the State Rehabilitation Association. Jake was invited to speak at conferences about adaptive techniques for ranch work and equine therapy. Emma supported him through his first public speaking engagements, helping him overcome his nervousness about discussing his disability with strangers as their professional collaborations strengthened their personal relationship. Jake began to see a future that included both his ranch work and a meaningful partnership with Emma. He started making modifications to the ranch house, installing features that would make it more accessible and comfortable for both of them to share. Emma, watching Jake's growing confidence and success, realized that her fears about their relationship had been unfounded, rather than being destroyed by the challenges of disability. They had grown stronger by facing those challenges together. She began to envision a permanent life with Jake, something she had never seriously considered with previous boyfriends. The moment that crystallized their commitment came during a particularly difficult therapy session with a young rodeo rider who had suffered a similar spinal injury to Jake's. The patient was angry, hopeless, and refusing to participate in his rehabilitation. Traditional therapy approaches had failed, and his family was desperate. Jake worked with the young man for hours, sharing his own story and demonstrating the possibilities that existed beyond the initial trauma. Emma watched Jake's patience, wisdom, and genuine compassion as he guided their patient through his first successful riding session since his accident. The transformation in both the patient and Jake himself was profound. That evening, Emma told Jake that watching him help others was when she truly understood the man she had fallen in love with. She saw that his accident, while devastating, had also given him unique gifts of empathy and insight that he was using to transform other lives. His disability wasn't a limitation to be overcome, but rather a source of strength and purpose. Jake responded by telling Emma that her belief in him had made his recovery possible, but her love had made his life worth living again. He credited her with helping him discover that his value as a person wasn't diminished by his physical limitations. She had taught him that love wasn't about what someone could do for you, but about who they were as a person. Their conversation that night lasted until dawn, as they shared their deepest feelings and talked about their hopes for the future. They discussed marriage, children, and the life they wanted to build together. Jake admitted that he had been carrying his grandmother's engagement ring in his pocket for weeks, waiting for the right moment to propose. Emma surprised him by saying that she didn't need a formal proposal because she had already made her choice. She wanted to spend her life with him, building their therapeutic riding program and helping other families navigate the challenges of spinal injuries. She wanted to have children with him and raise them to understand that strength came in many forms. Jake's proposal was simple and heartfelt. He told Emma that she had given him back his life and his hope for the future. He promised to love her with the same determination he had shown in learning to ride again. He vowed to support her dreams and to build a partnership based on mutual respect and unwavering commitment. Emma's acceptance was equally sincere. She promised to stand by Jake through whatever challenges their future might hold. She pledged to continue seeing him as the strong, capable man she had fallen in love with, regardless of what others might think about their unconventional love story. As Jake slipped his grandmother's ring onto Emma's finger in the early morning light, both of them knew they had found something rare and precious. Their relationship had been forged through adversity and strengthened by mutual support. They had learned that true love wasn't about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone whose imperfections complemented your own. Jake and Emma's wedding took place on a perfect autumn day at the Morrison Ranch, 18 months after their first meeting. The ceremony was held in the same pasture where Jake had first learned to ride again, surrounded by the horses that had played such an important role in their love story. Emma walked down an aisle lined with wildflowers while Jake waited at the altar in his dress wheelchair, looking handsome in his black cowboy hat and western suit. The wedding guests included patients from their therapeutic riding program, colleagues who had initially questioned their relationship but now supported their union, and family members who had watched their love story unfold. Jake's parents, who credited Emma with saving their son's life, welcomed her as the daughter they had always wanted. Emma's mother, who had flown in from New Mexico, was moved to tears watching her daughter marry a man who clearly adored her. During their vows, Jake thanked Emma for seeing strength in him when he felt only weakness, and for helping him discover that his accident had not ended his life, but had redirected it toward a greater purpose. Emma promised to continue challenging Jake to grow while supporting him through every obstacle they would face together. Their exchange of rings was accompanied by the gentle nickering of horses in the nearby pasture. The reception featured country music and dancing under string lights hung between oak trees. Jake had worried about how he would manage the traditional first dance with Emma. But she had choreographed a beautiful routine that incorporated his wheelchair as part of their movement together. Their dance received a standing ovation from guests, who were moved by the grace and love they displayed. Following their honeymoon in Colorado, where they spent a week horseback riding through mountain trails using Jake's adaptive equipment, the newlyweds returned to begin their life together at the ranch. Emma officially moved into the modified ranch house that Jake had prepared for them, bringing her books, medical equipment, and her own horse to add to the Morrison family herd. Their therapeutic riding program continued to expand as word spread about their innovative approach to spinal injury rehabilitation. Medical centers throughout Texas began referring patients to the Morrison Ranch for specialized equine therapy. Jake and Emma developed training protocols that combined traditional physical therapy with horseback riding, achieving recovery rates that exceeded those of conventional programs. Emma maintained a small private practice for other patients while dedicating most of her time to their ranch-based program. Jake took the lead on horse training and patient instruction, while Emma handled the medical aspects of treatment planning. Their partnership proved that their different skills complemented each other perfectly in both their professional and personal lives. 2 years after their wedding, Emma discovered she was pregnant with their first child. Jake's reaction was a mixture of joy and terror as he worried about his ability to be a good father from a wheelchair. Emma reassured him by pointing out all the ways he had already demonstrated his capacity for nurturing and teaching through his work with their patients. Their daughter, Sarah Grace Morrison, was born on a snowy February morning after a labor that tested both parents' strength and commitment. Jake's presence in the delivery room, offering encouragement and holding Emma's hand, proved that his physical limitations didn't diminish his ability to support his wife through the most challenging moments. Parenthood brought new adventures and adaptations for Jake and Emma. Jake learned to change diapers from his wheelchair and develop techniques for carrying Sarah safely while navigating the ranch. Emma marveled at Jake's creativity in finding solutions to challenges that other fathers might not even recognize. Sarah's first word was horse, spoken during one of their family rides when she was 8 months old. As Sarah grew into a toddler, she naturally adapted to having a father in a wheelchair. She learned to climb onto his lap for story time and to hand him tools when he was working in the stable. To Sarah, her father's wheelchair was simply part of him, no more remarkable than his cowboy hat or his gentle way with horses. The Morrison Ranch therapeutic riding program gained national recognition when Jake was featured in a documentary about innovative rehabilitation techniques. The film showed Jake working with patients, Emma conducting therapy sessions, and their family life together. The documentary highlighted how their personal love story had evolved into a mission to help other families facing similar challenges. 3 years after Sarah's birth, Jake and Emma welcomed twin boys, Michael and Robert, named after Jake's father and best friend. Managing 3 young children while running a therapeutic program required even more creativity and teamwork. But Jake and Emma rose to the challenge. They installed playground equipment designed for wheelchair accessibility and taught their children that differences in ability were simply variations in how people moved through the world. The ranch became a second home to many of the families they served. Parents of injured children found hope in watching Jake and Emma's marriage thrive despite the challenges they had faced. Patients who had given up on life, just as Jake once had, discovered new possibilities by observing his daily routines as a husband, father, and successful rancher. One particularly meaningful moment came when Thunder, the horse responsible for Jake's accident, was brought back to the ranch by his previous owner, who could no longer care for him. Jake had to confront his complicated feelings about the animal that had changed his life so dramatically. With Emma's support, he chose forgiveness over bitterness. Recognizing that the accident had ultimately led him to discover his true purpose and find the love of his life, Jake slowly rebuilt a relationship with Thunder, using the horse in their a therapeutic program for patients who needed to overcome their own fears. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone who knew their story. The horse that had broken Jake's body had become an instrument of healing for others. Thunder seemed to sense the importance of his new role, displaying unusual patience and gentleness. With disabled riders, as their children grew older, Sarah, Michael, and Robert became junior assistants in the therapeutic program, helping their parents demonstrate that families touched by disability could thrive and contribute meaningfully to their community. Sarah showed particular aptitude for working with horses and announced at age 6 that she wanted to become a horse doctor. Like her parents, Emma established a scholarship fund for physical therapy students interested in equine-assisted therapy, ensuring that their innovative techniques would be passed on to the next generation of medical professionals. Jake wrote a book about his recovery journey and the development of their program, with proceeds funding equipment donations to other therapeutic riding centers. 10 years after their wedding, Jake and Emma renewed their vows in the same pasture, where they had first married. Surrounded by their 3 children, Jake's aging parents, dozens of former patients, and colleagues from around the country, they reaffirmed their commitment to each other and to their shared mission of healing. During the ceremony, Jake reflected on how his darkest moment had become the foundation for his greatest joy. He had lost the use of his legs, but gained so much more. A love deeper than anything he had imagined possible. A family that filled his days with laughter, a purpose that gave meaning to every challenge he had overcome. Emma spoke about how Jake had taught her that strength wasn't about what a person could do with their body, but about what they chose to do with their heart and mind. She had set out to heal his physical injuries, but had discovered that he was the one who healed her fears about love and commitment. As the sun set over the Texas hills on their anniversary celebration, Jake and Emma sat together watching their children play with the therapy horses, while former patients and their families enjoyed the evening festivities. They had built something beautiful from the wreckage of tragedy, proving that sometimes life's greatest gifts come wrapped in its most difficult challenges. Their love story had begun with an ending, the end of Jake's life as an able-bodied cowboy. But it had become a beginning of something far more meaningful, a partnership that transformed not only their own lives but the lives of countless others who needed to believe that hope could survive even the most devastating circumstances. The Morrison Ranch continued to be a place of healing and hope, where broken people learned to rebuild their lives, and where love proved stronger than any limitation. Jake and Emma's legacy was written not just in their marriage and family, but in the hundreds of patients who had found their own reasons to fight, just as Emma had once given Jake his reason to live again.